Yes, I am ready.
Okay, great. All right, so now tell me, I know you were born on the naval ship, and tell me about that. How did that come to be?
Well, for me, I don't remember too much, but I remember what my parents had told me. They they had met while my dad was still in the Navy. Um, he would actually travel all the way from San Diego to Los Angeles to see my mom, and due to some family circumstances, they could no longer keep seeing each other in Los Angeles. So my dad took my mom to San Diego, and from there, shortly after, they had me. And since my dad was in the Navy, the naval hospital was the hospital that I was born in because that's who his care provider was. So it was Balboa Hospital. It's still in San Diego to this day. It's in an area called Balboa Park, and it's huge, sprawling. For lack of a better term, I guess it'd be a complex, but it consists of park, museums, and then that naval facility that's still there.
Oh, wow. I've been to Balboa Park. I've been to that museum there.
No, there it's really nice, the park and a lot of the museums. It's and I believe the
Yeah.
zoo's still there too.
The what?
The San Diego Zoo.
Mm, I think you're right. I've been there too. Exactly. Now, was there a ship in the park, or was it a hospital?
It was from my understanding, it was just a hospital, but it was
Okay.
that's where everybody. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but that was one of the main naval hospitals in San Diego, and that's where a lot of the naval personnel they would get their care, or that's where they would have have their children delivered there, as opposed to some of the medical facilities on the ship, which are a bit I would imagine to be smaller.
I imagine, right. Yes, exactly. How has the military affected your life?
Well, for me, it's a couple different ways it affected my life. I guess first and foremost is just always having that appreciation for the military and the service and sacrifice that service members have to make. All four of my uncles on my mom's side, they served in the U.S. Navy. My dad started out in the Navy, but he transitioned to the Coast Guard and then later the Army. And then on my dad's side, his dad was in the Army during the Vietnam era, and then his dad before him was in the Army around, I want to say, the World War II era. So on both sides of the family, there was always that connection to the armed forces of the United States. And then in terms of my life, just always seeing that and being mindful of that, but also just having to constantly adapt because since we were in the military, we did move a lot. We started out in San Diego, then we ended up in Los Angeles, then we moved to New York, then we moved to New Jersey, uh, back to California. I want to say Riverside, Los Angeles again, and then San Diego again. So just kind of crisscrossing the
Wow.
continental United States there.
Wow. Wow. Do you feel that all that moving was good for you or bad? Or
Um,
neither, or in the middle?
I'm kind of more ambivalent towards it. I know obviously there's some things that would have been nice, like you hear stories of people. Yeah, I was in middle school and high school throughout my whole years. Like they have that same group of people that they know, and that's I think that me personally, I think that's really cool. But I just didn't get to experience that. Like I'm not gonna say it was a bad thing because I got to see new areas, meet new people, but just having to constantly adapt and I don't want to say reinvent yourself, but just adapt to different environments and different people and make try to make new friend groups and connections because I constantly did move. I had I want to say two or three different elementary schools. I had two different middle schools. Uh, I went to three different high schools. It was just a lot of moving, a lot of changes. So I can't say that it was
Mm.
a bad thing. I mean, I would have liked to have grown up, like, had that same group, and like I could say like, oh yeah, like, I grew up with these people, but it's just kind of like, oh well, I don't even know which high school reunion to go to because I went to three. But it's just different. So I can't say that it was bad or good, but it's just definitely a different experience.
Yeah, boy, that's for sure. Now, are you in the military? Are you going to be in the military, or?
I am not currently in the military. It's something that I possibly looked at in the past, but um, it's one of those that although I am interested in it, I just want to get all my schooling and everything out of the way first, and then see. And even then, um, I want to do something where I could do more advocacy in the. If I was to join the military, I want to do something more advocacy. I feel like, especially with my dad, his dad before him, and his dad before him, they were all infantrymen. They all served and fought in for this country, and all have had to deal with varying levels of trauma. And I just feel like if I was to enter the military, it would definitely be for something that's more, and I could do more advocacy. So the only thing I could possibly see myself doing is there's a judicial component of the military known as JAG, which they essentially act as lawyers for the United States Army or whatever respective branch. That's the only thing I could ever see myself doing, just because it would be that advocacy work. But as of now, I'm just focusing on finishing up my school and then seeing my career plans from there.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. What improvements do you feel need to be made?
In the armed forces?
Yeah, that's what you were talking about advocating for, correct?
Yes. I would say more mental health services for service members, and then just removing that stigma, not just from the armed forces, just more as a society in general. I mean, we've gotten better at it in terms of seeking help, but there's still that stigma of like not talking about things or not talking about your mental health issues because of fear of being labeled as quote unquote like crazy, or like, oh, you have like issues, as opposed to something where it's just normalized. Like, people go to hospital visits for preemptive care to check up for things, or just see if they're okay. Like, it should be the same with mental health services. And although we talk about mental health a lot, there's still the stigma, and the services aren't as funded as they are needed, or at least in my opinion.
Okay, so mainly mental health, and seeking the ability to seek it without tainted, without a bad feeling.
Yes, I'll say that
Is that right?
That would be number one, and then just addressing the well, I guess in the military. Well, I've seen it in the military. I've heard stories about it, but also just in general in society where you see power dynamics. There's huge issues of sexual abuse. I mean, sexual assault and abuse. With different power dynamics, people are afraid to come forward. Not just in the military, but you see it in other places where there's a disparity with the power dynamic. A lot of people don't want to come forward for fear of retaliation or retribution, or feel like nobody's gonna listen to them, or even where there's like kind of like a sad culture of almost victim blaming has emerged, where people would rather blame the victim than see the power dynamics and see where people in power or in certain systems or institutions where they can get away with it, as opposed to actually addressing the issue.
Right. Wow, that sounds great. And what are you studying actually right now?
Currently, I am in ASU's history program. My emphasis is on world history, but I'm seeing what I'm going to do after, because I would not mind at all applying to a doctoral program. But after this, I am looking at other hybrid programs, or even possibly law programs as well. So
Wow, that's real. I really want to follow your path. So let's keep in touch. It sounds really. I like your passion
thank you,
very much.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you, because on your introduction post, you were just talking about the immigration more than, as much as the military. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the difficulty in immigrating or the difference in the cultures between the two countries, or did no one immigrate? I wasn't sure.
No, there was definitely immigration patterns. I could speak on both sides of the family. Well, for my dad's family, since they were all born. Well, not my dad, but the rest of his extended family, I should say, they were all his mother's father, cousins, everybody else. They were all born in
Right,
the
right.
island of Puerto Rico. So, um, with that, they are U.S. citizens. They may not have certain of the same privileges that, let's just say, somebody born in the United States proper would have in terms representation and among other things, but they were still U.S. citizens. But they all more or less still wanted to. I don't even know how to explain it. I would say just show that they were, quote unquote, Americans too, because in a lot of people's eyes they don't recognize that. So they all signed up or wanted to sign up for the armed forces, and a lot of them, uh, they ended up moving throughout the United States or different theaters of combat with that. But in terms of their immigration stories, a lot of them, specifically during the 60s and 50s, from my dad's side of the family, that's when they did
Uh-huh.
migrate from the island of Puerto Rico to New York for jobs.
Mhm.
And
Okay. And they lived in New York City then?
well, my dad, my grandfather initially lived in New York City for a while, but he went back to Puerto Rico. But my dad and his mother, which would be my grandmother, and his sister, and then some of his family, they lived in New York City.
Okay. All right. And I wanted to ask you about the culture differences. Did they ever tell you about their childhood or how they grew up that was different than the way you grew up? Um, Things like that. Did they tell you about Puerto Rico versus America?
Yes, they would. Specifically, my dad would just tell me, just how it's difficult for them growing up because my dad's father left the picture pretty early on, so it's pretty much himself, my
Oh,
sister, and
okay.
their mother, or my grandmother, let's just say, providing for them. So it's a single mother household, and her trying to provide for them. And at the time in the 70s, and them growing up in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, but 70s and 80s, at least where they were from in Brooklyn, parts of it were nice, but parts of it were still what's the word I'm looking for? Very rough around the edges, I guess I could
Right.
say. Um, so he would always tell me about that and how difficult it was, and then kind of told me the differences between quote unquote New Yorican culture, which is Puerto Ricans born in New York City versus actual island born Puerto Ricans, and some of the differences like in the island, obviously they speak more Spanish, and the pace, I guess the pace of life is a little bit, it's tropical. It's a little bit slower than let's just say, New York City,
Yes, I would imagine, right.
but he would kind of tell me the differences in that respect, and but that both cultures, they still did have, like, obviously their ties to the island. They got along for the most part, but he would tell me that there would be certain segments that would um, have their differences. Not all, but some island-born Puerto Ricans tend to have like a notion that they're quote unquote more Puerto Rican because they were actually born in the island. They speak more Spanish, or they're more in tune to the culture, as opposed to like stateside or even New York born Puerto Ricans, who they consider as, like, having quote unquote lost touch because they may not speak as much, Spanish, or may not know, everything. But I mean, I've heard this said before about other groups in the past, such as like Italians living in, let's just say, New York City, or somewhere else, as opposed to Italians from Italy.
Okay. So was that kind of a hierarchy, a kind of a racism almost, or classism from like the ones who were born in Puerto Rico? Were they higher on the social spectrum than the ones that were born in New York or the U.S.?
I wouldn't say so much that it was structured. I guess it's just more like a belief among some, maybe a little bit of classism in terms of I could see more affluent, let's just say, islanders from the island saying that, but my dad said
Oh,
it was just more loose. It wasn't actually anything structured, or anything of that nature. But my dad would kind of always joke about it. Not really joke about it, but he would always say like, yeah, there were certain like family members I knew that would make those comments, but he's like, at the end of the day, I live in New York, and my job, like even my worst job, pays a lot better than most jobs on the island.
uh-huh. Right, for sure. Right. Well, that's really interesting. Um, all right, so now just to change track a little, maybe this might be our last question. I don't know how much time you have, but um, just about your mom. So you grew up with your mom. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Uh, Growing up, only I was the only child for most of the time, but
Oh,
uh,
okay.
with my mom, growing up with her, I always did see about like, not to say that my dad's family didn't immigrate, but at the end of the day, like they were born in Puerto Rico, you're a U.S. citizen. On my mom's side, that wasn't a privilege that they had. They were from Nicaragua, specifically Managua, the capital, and they immigrated during the Nicaraguan Revolution, which later turns into the Nicaraguan Civil War. We had, the government that was ousted, the Somoza government. In its place was the Sandinista government, and then shortly thereafter, you had the civil war between the Sandinista government and the Contra counter-revolutionary forces, and that just turned the whole country into a war zone for many years. And my
Mm,
mom would tell me stories about them having to like, in their own home, having to take cover, or like be mindful because they'd hear like machine gun fire or grenades, and then just going to the store. How she told me like it was chaos. Like you'd go for food and they hardly had any food. There'd be long lines for food, and then after a while, they would just like grab things and just throw them at people to try to get them out. Like they would just throw like, like cans, or just throw like literally like live poultry and chickens just to get people out, and just how scarce it
oh
was.
my goodness, really?
And then just how they had to,
Wow.
they felt no choice at that point, but for the entire family to leave and make that journey from Nicaragua, through Latin America, and into United States. And she'd always tell me about that story, and I would see how, because of that, life was a little difficult for her. English was the second language for her, and she'd tell me about how in high school how she had to go through ESL courses, and adjust to life in the United States, and just even simple things that we take for granted, like like having food, a bunch of food on the shelves, and or
Right, right. Wow.
just being able to actually pursue college education, because at the time, for her, that wasn't something that could be done in the United States at that point. If you're an immigrant, a recent immigrant such as herself, like you just really couldn't go to college. If you came out with a high school diploma, like that was an accomplishment.
Right, wow. Now, how old was she when she came to this country?
I had to ask her about.
Like a girl, or was she a young adult, or?
She was a girl, but yeah, she was definitely a girl. She wasn't a young adult, but still having to like transition as somebody as like
Right,
that
right.
was young, having to come in and learn everything almost entirely new and different, just a different lifestyle.
Wow. And she came with both of her parents?
No, they immigrated in ways, and that kind of later became like a source of I wouldn't say tension, but uh, I mean, for lack of a better term, I guess tension, because my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side, they immigrated first, and I believe they took I want to say they took with them firstborn, uh, the firstborn son, one of my uncles, and then they took later on they took another one, but so they immigrated first, and then for the longest time it was just my mom, and I think one or two of my other uncles with my great grandmother and great grandfather, and they were in the country of Nicaragua by themselves for a while, and they had to come to the United States later in about like the second or third wave.
Oh, I see. Wow. Okay, so I really would love to hear more about the immigration story and what they went through, if you even know it. Do you have any specific hardships or wins on the way here?
Um,
Do you know what they went through, or have they shared that with you?
they honestly they don't talk about it too much, but from bits and pieces of what I've gathered, they had to first find, like, I'm not even sure if it was a actual commercial flight. It might have even been like just a cargo flight, but I can't
Oh,
speak on. But I know they had to find first a flight, discreetly and quickly as possible out of Nicaragua into, I believe it was, I know it was Mexico, but I want to say it was the actual capital, Mexico City. So, and that they were fortunate, because a lot of people, um, at that time or even now, they have to make an overland trek through, different countries of Central America into Mexico. So they were fortunate that they were at least able to find a flight and at least not have to go through all these different countries,
right.
because then that would literally have to been they would have to go through Honduras, Guatemala, and maybe even possibly Belize, and that's just to get to the southern tip of like Chiapas and Mexico. But at least fortunately they were able to get a
Wow.
flight into the capital. At least my mom and one of my uncles and my grandmother. And then from there, what they told me, they had to make an overland journey from Mexico City, uh, to the actual border, and then from there, I believe they said, uh, more or less from their accounts, it sounds like like a coyote, which, like, it's, what's the way I can explain it? For lack of a better term, like a guide for people to enter into the United States, smuggler,
Right.
whatever,
Right. I
whatever.
know what a coyote is.
Okay, okay,
Right. A
perfect, perfect.
coyote who smuggles people in.
Perfect. I was gonna say, yeah.
Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I was gonna say smuggler,
Okay.
but just somebody who could get
Yeah.
them across, and specifically where they crossed, they said it was dangerous, that it was mountainous and almost desert-like, and it was very hot, but that they were able to get through, and then from there, they were able to go from San Diego to Los Angeles. But she just felt like,
Wow.
I don't remember if they took I believe they said they took like a small, they were they were able to, go from San Diego to Los Angeles. I just don't remember the means of transportation. I just know they went through a transportation hub, and my mom told me that she just felt like, humiliated, because she had to go through like this whole experience, and she's there, and everybody knows how they got there, because my mom told me that her grandmother and uncle, they were just like covered in like brush and dust, dirt, and like mud, and she just like felt very like dehumanized and like, you know degraded in a sense.
Right. Right. Wow. How brave, huh?
No, definitely, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not something that I
Yeah.
could even contemplate.
No. Right. Okay. So give you this last question, if that's okay with you. Is well, what takeaway did you learn from your mom? Like, what do you have? What would you say the lessons you learned from your mom were, or are?
From her, I mean, she always gives me that sense of, working hard, but also knowing where, you came from. And it's always been very inspiring to me. And that's why a lot of my research has been on Central America. That's possibly what kind of got me into history, is just trying to learn more about like my family roots, and then, you know, the stories of Puerto Rico and Nicaragua, and then just also looking, and not just at that, but like the conditions. Why would people, would want to leave? I love New York City, but just why would somebody take such a long journey to an environment that's completely different from a tropical island, going to tropical island of Puerto Rico to Manhattan or Brooklyn, or going from, what are the conditions that lead somebody to leave Nicaragua to come to the United States in the first place?
Exactly. Right. And just just the example that you said, that sounds pretty amazing for you too, right?
No, it definitely is. And then just trying to remember just everything, that all the sacrifices that both my parents made, and then trying to make them proud and enjoy all the things that like may get taken for granted for in this country. That's not to say that obviously no country is perfect, but definitely things can be a lot worse, and that's why I'm thankful for being here and having the rights of a citizen, whether being able to vote or even just things that people take for granted, such as like speaking out, or being able to advocate, because you honestly can't do that in certain places. And even Nicaragua now, the situation is definitely not as bad as it was back in the 70s, 80s, or even 90s, but still there's a limit to what you can say and do, and in terms of even like protest or even speaking out against the current government. So always just being mindful of that, and always being mindful of like my mom specifically, like how far she's come, and the fact that with her high school diploma that she was able to provide with my along with my dad, to be able to provide for the family, and to see where she's come along and how far she's come as well.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. What a great story. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we can switch around. Let me hang up on here, and then we'll switch around the interview, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.